Lui被妈妈
Termette un semin come.
No, ne si chiama.
Perché bennina? No. Hani bir dakika gelemez. Em gồng lại mày sao? Cái bò thì sẽ kiếm được anh nhỉ? No.
There are a lot more police cars in Helmer than ambulances, so they arrived for Redgrave almost immediately. The officers didn't deny themselves the pleasure of turning out his pockets, hitting his head against the door of the car, and throwing him inside like a bag of flour. Out of respect for his father's achievements, they didn't beat Evan with their batons in public. They saved that for when they were behind closed doors, back at the precinct. Redgrave, resigned to his fate, watched the scene with indifference, as if from far away. The fate of Evan Redgrave is unknown. His name has been lost among millions of similar denunciations, disappeared under thousands of multicolored seals, evaporated under hundreds of other people's signatures, vanished. His wife and daughter never learned whether he was shot or died in the cold of the correctional labor camps, along with thousands of other unfortunate souls.
Hani bir dakika gelemez anh nhỉ? Được kìa kẹp được phó bác. Perché bennina? No, nem sama. Termette un semin come. Ma che missione faremo fare? Penso un buon bene a farlo. Nếu sự gã là cái mà. Em biết nào mà đi kiểu rồi. Em gồng lại mày sao? Em får honom med knähalen så. Kẹp phó bao số rồi lấy cổ. No.
The death of Redgrave Jr. attracted far less attention than that of his father. And who was he really? Some even said that Caleb had no son and that this petty upstart was an imposter who just wanted to get his hands on a ministerial apartment. The case was closed so quickly and the cremation carried out so hastily that it seemed like they wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible, like an annoying fly. Less than a month later, nobody even remembered that there had ever been a man called Evan Redgrave. Only his wife and daughter, who remained in distant Reading, remembered him, but they never found out what had led to such a sudden and sad end.
Le che chiaro fa ma solo le co.
Le ragazzine alla sempre che erano arrivati con smani. Levano quanto non vuol dire. Levano come se.
Rise into the skies, and so many countries yet to learn about Evan Redgrave. Replacing the wise leader, is that not the pinnacle of a ministry career? The name Redgrave was respected before, but now it inspires awe. Isn't that what you wanted for your son, Father? Isn't that the greatness you dreamed of when you created Heimdall? Evan sits at the top of the world, and everything belongs to him, from the mountains and rivers to the people and their thoughts. He alone decides what his subjects can feel and want. Evan Redgrave is a god now, and what does it matter that the fate of all gods is loneliness?
Levani come se. Levani quanto non vuol dire. Levani me come una. Le ragazzine alla sempre che erano arrivati con smani. Che erano arrivati con smani. Levani quanto non vuol dire. Le ragazzine alla sempre Levani me come una. Levani come se. Levani me come una. Chiarate body for smani. Vedi garzine alla sempre out.
A series of terrible explosions shook the city. The relay towers became colossal columns of flame, falling on residents' houses and destroying the streets below. Violent fires raged for several days, and when they were finally put out, the heaps of twisted iron and sad memories were all that remained of Project Heimdall. Little changed in the country. Ministers continued to fight over power. Old players were deposed by new ones, each more vain than the last. A lack of principles became a synonym for success. Ordinary citizens remained a bargaining chip in political games, small cogs in the soulless machine of total surveillance and control. The ruling elite had no use for Evan. After the protective dome disappeared, he was held at gunpoint and thrown out the same window his father had fallen from. Like father, like son, they shouted at him in a mocking farewell. And only during that fall, in a state of absolute terror, did Evan truly feel free for the first time in his life, even if only for a fraction of a second.
Levano in mano le garzine alla chiarate i body for smani. Nivani comments. Nivani comments. Chiarate i body for smani. Le garzine alla sempre out.
If Heimdall had fallen into the wrong hands. But in the final seconds of his life, Evan still thought, could things have turned out differently? Was there ever any way for me to change something for the better?
Nivani comments. Levano in GODMODE. Levano in mano le garzine alla sempre out. Chiarate i body for smani. Levano in mano le GODMODE.
In the Vietnam, I think you're all.
Vedi garzine alla sempre out. everybody was funny. Nobody commented.
About their own basic needs. After only a month, Helmer was a ghost town where even the most desperate did not set foot. Anyone who understood what was happening and who still had free will wisely fled the city, while Evan stayed on the top floor, witnessing the consequences of his choice day after day. Sometimes, in moments of weakness, he thought that punishing himself with the monstrous sight of the massacre below was enough to atone for his sins, but soon there was no one left to whom he could repent. And so the thought of the shredder several floors below seemed more and more attractive to Evan every day, but what mattered was that the thought was his own. Pulsating hum drawn through the city, filling the air, boring into every mind and bending every single person to its mechanical will. Men and women, adults and children. In just a few minutes, the entire population submitted to Heimdall's power. From then on, people thought, felt, wished, and did only what was required of them. Luxury, senseless and merciless. Marble statues, palaces of golden toilets for officials, Persian carpets, mountains of jewels and money, full pools filled with champagne. The atmosphere of greed and a rotten system drowning in corruption. People stopped seeing anything wrong in it. The worship of one idol over another caused no kind of conflict. The signal from the relays took care of that. The wise leader was replaced by the luxurious leader, and no one noticed. Ferguson didn't appreciate the gesture. Of course, he gladly took control of the relays, but that didn't change anything for Evan. The boss didn't trust Redgrave, so he got rid of him as soon as he had what he wanted. Evan was accused of conspiring to overthrow the regime and arrested on the spot. The overzealous police officers, already under the influence of Heimdall's signals, beat Evan mercilessly, screaming, "This is for Ferguson." He was a low pulsating hum drawn through the city, filling the air, boring into... In just a few minutes, the entire population submitted to Heimdall's power. From then on, people thought, felt, wished, and did only what was required of them. It's scary when a real psychopath comes to power, and it is a nightmare if his power is limitless. But there are no words to describe the horror when this maniac gains control of your mind. In the hands of the Salvo, Heimdall towers spread across the country, but they didn't just force people to obey. From time to time, they transmitted a single emotion at full capacity: pure horror. Beside themselves with fear, people would increasingly hole up in the deepest crevices they could find, like mice. They had less and less time for anything useful. An atmosphere of impending doom, bordering on panic, reigned in the country for a long time. Evan plunged into a world of boundless overindulgence. At first to satisfy his own curiosity, and then for the sake of entertainment, he brought an incredible amount of pain into this world. The apprentice surpassed his master. People started to fear him even more than they feared the Salvo, and as soon as the new leader realized this, Evan's career ended very quickly, unlike his life. He would have been happy to die, but he no longer had the luxury of making his own choices. A low pulsating hum droned through the city, filling the air. In just a few minutes, the entire population submitted to Heimdall's power. From then on, people thought, felt, wished, and did only what was required of them. The relays quickly spread across the country, and citizens were processed into biomaterial to create clones. Copies of the ideal employee, once known as Carl Stein, replaced ordinary people, first in Helmer, then throughout the country, and then, step by step, all over the world. And next, the conquest of the solar system and the stars. A perfect, effectively functioning world has no room for strife or war, hunger or injustice, love or compassion. When the work was done, and everyone, even his family, had been erased from his life, Evan shared the same fate as his boss. They passed away as equals, proudly looking at the fruits of their labor, and leaving behind an ideal society that worshipped their images, preserved their Bible, and forever remembered Evan as a prophet beside the divine Isaac Weinberg. Death did not frighten Redgrave, because he had accepted it on his own free will, unlike the millions of people he had deprived of the choice. been decided and regretted that Heimnitz didn't find enough soap for his rope. At least he wasn't around to witness one of the largest genocides in history, and the destruction of his family along with it. A low pulsating hum droned through the city, filling the air, boring into every mind and bending every single person to its mechanical will. Men and women, adults and children, rich and poor. In just a few minutes, the entire population submitted to Heimdall's power. From then on, people thought, felt, wished, and did only what was required of them. You can't force a person to be happy against their will, but what if you forcefully give them free will? What if you instill in them a single thought? From now on, you make your own decisions and take responsibility for your own actions. Could it bring about peace? The inhabitants of Helmer were the first to become truly independent. Even though their lives weren't perfect, their choices were often far from ideal, and the consequences of these choices were painful. But they had their own choices, their own happiness, and their own mercy. The ministers, all of them were executed. The monstrous and useless bureaucratic apparatus was gradually dismantled, and the ministry building was turned into a museum dedicated to senseless cruelty. Evan became a full-fledged member of the new society. When asked about what happened in the last days of the great state, he would only smile and stay silent. He had no wish to recall his time spent in the ministry or the nightmares that he witnessed and took part in. Having lost himself in real work and finally reunited with his family. Until the very end of his life, he tried to erase from his memory the faces of his superiors and colleagues, wishing fervently that he could stop hearing military marches in the distance and the roar of 1,000 voices chanting,